Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Aleph of Masechta Pesachim, Daf 31. Today is mostly Bava Kama. Talk about loans, collaterals, fields, Reuven's, Shimon's, that kind of stuff for most of the Daf. So I'll just leave it at that and let's jump in. So we're starting at the new Mishnah on Daf Lamed, all the way at the bottom. Good. So let's read that again. So if you have a non-Jew and he lends some money to a Jew before Pesach, and the loan is due after Pesach, and then let's just say for now that the Jew gives a whole bunch of chametz to the non-Jew and says, look, if I default on this loan, all this chametz is yours. So in that case, so if the Jew does in fact default on the loan after Pesach, well, it's considered as though all of this food was in the property of the non-Jew already before, belonged to the non-Jew before Pesach. And therefore, after Pesach will be chametz shavar alav Pesach belonging to a nachri, and we said that that would be acceptable, at least according to Reb Shimon. Whereas if it was the opposite, if it was the Jew doing the lending and the non-Jew brought over the chametz before Pesach, and then the non-Jew defaults on the loan, well then it will be considered as if the chametz was the property of the Jew over Pesach, in which case it would be asur bano. That is our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Itmar Balchov Abayi Omar Lemafrei Ugove V'Rav Amar Mikan L'Haba Ugove. Aha. So the Gemara brings up a machlokas between Abayi and Rava regarding a loan. Okay, a Balchov is a creditor. A creditor is somebody who is owed money. So Balchov, a creditor, Abayi Amar Mafreya Ugove. So Abayi says that he collects retroactively. Rava Amar Mikan L'Haba Ugove, whereas Rava says that he collects from this point and onward. So we're talking about a situation where we have our friends Reuven and Shimon. Reuven lends $1,000 to Shimon. Shimon says that, hey Reuven, if I don't pay you back, you can have my field. So now Shimon doesn't pay back Reuven, so Reuven takes his field. The question is, at what point do we consider it as though the field is Reuven's? Do we consider it, like Abaye is saying, Limafreya, that it's considered as though the field belongs to Reuven already retroactively from the time of the loan? Or is it like Rava saying that it's Mikanu Lahaba, that it's from the time that the default happened, from the date that they determined that if the loan is not paid back by that date, then Shimon's field will belong to Reuven. Maybe it's only from that point that the field belongs to Reuven. So now, where am I? Kol heicha de akdish love v'zaven love kuliamalo plige dasimalve v'tarif v'asimalve ufari. So in a situation where Shimon, the borrower, did something with this field during this time. So for example, if they made this deal at the beginning of January and the loan had to be paid back by the beginning of February, and if not, so then Shimon's field goes to Reuven. So if during the month of January Shimon pulled some tricks and he sold the field to Levi, or he was makdish his field, so everyone agrees that that's not going to work. During this in-between period where it's kind of pending, depending on if Shimon pays back the loan or not. So if Shimon goes ahead and sells this field during that time, or is makdish, makes it hektish to the base of mikdash during this time, that is not going to work because it was in sort of a pending state. Right? Everybody, both Abaye and Rava, agree to Asimalva v'tarif that Reuven, the lender, can go to the person who bought Shimon's field during this time and say, hey, that field is my field. Basimalva ufarik, or Ruvain, the lender, can, if Shimon was makdish his field during this time, Ruvain can just go and pay sort of a nominal fee or a symbolic fee and be just a penny or something, and be podeh that field from hektish. The Tanan, as we learn in a Mishnah, Mosifo dinar ufodes anachasim ha'elu, that in certain cases you can just kind of pay a very small amount and be podeh a field. So kiplige, so where's the machlokas between Abaye and Rava? Tizovin malve v'kadosh malve. What happens if it's Ruvain who sold the field, or Ruvain was makdish the field, right? So again, Ruvain lent Shimon $1,000 on the 1st of January. Now if Shimon doesn't pay back Ruvain by the 1st of February, so then the field belongs to Ruvain. Ruvain, during the month of January, goes and sells this field, or he's makdish this field. Now Shimon hasn't yet defaulted on the loan. So Abaye says that it's considered Ruvain's the mafreya retroactively from the beginning of January, because once February 1st comes and Shimon hasn't yet paid back Ruvain, igloi mills to the mafreya. Well, then we could say that, already from day one, to meikar b'shusei hava koi, that from day one already we can consider it as though it was Ruvain's. Mishaper akdish v'shaper zovin, and therefore it's within Ruvain's right to sell the field during January, or to be makdish the field during January. The Rava Amar says, Rava mikanu lahaba ugove, that you're really only collecting the field from, right, the field becomes Ruvain's from February and on. Kevin the ilu havule zuze have misalikle bezuze, because since, after all, if Shimon had the money, he would have given it to Ruvain and taken the field back. So ishtikach tehashta kakani. So then we can assume that only at the time that, on February 1st, when Shimon is unable to come up with the money and defaults on the loan, it's only at that point that the field becomes Ruvain's, because up until that point, if Shimon had the money, he would have taken back the field. It's only at that point, at the 1st of February, when Shimon says, look, I just simply don't have the money, that sort of, it officially becomes Ruvain's. Okay. So that's the machlokas between Abaye and Rava. Abaye says that when it comes to a sort of collateral for a loan, it becomes the lender's. Abaye says retroactively. Rava says mikanu lahaba, from this point on. Now the Gemara wants to know, does Rava really say this? Does Rava really say that it's dafka mikanu lahaba, that the collateral becomes the borrower, the lender's, only from this point on and not retroactively? Okay. You guys ready for like a shtickle convoluted case? There's a lot of different characters. You gotta, not a lot, there's basically Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and a bunch of orphans. So you just gotta remember who's who. So how about this? Let's lay it out in advance. Reuven is the guy. Reuven's sort of the one in the center of it all. What he does is he's got a field. He sells this field to Shimon for $1,000. Okay? Now here's the thing. Shimon doesn't pay Reuven for the field. Shimon instead says, look, Reuven, I owe you $1,000 for the field. Now I have other properties that are worth $1,000, and I will sort of put them as like a guarantee for the purchase. But Shimon doesn't actually pay Reuven $1,000 for the field. Okay, so now Shimon has Reuven's field. He hasn't yet paid Reuven for it. Now, here's the thing. Reuven owes Levi $1,000. Okay, so we have this kind of web that's emerging, right? Basically, Shimon owes Reuven $1,000. Reuven owes Levi $1,000. Reuven dies. So now you have his orphans. So now we have kind of a thing going on. And by the way, I forgot to mention, Reuven, when he borrowed $1,000 from Shimon, he said, if I default on the loan, I got this field. Okay, so basically, you have Shimon And then when Reuven sold the field to Shimon, he told Shimon, by the way, if ever anybody comes to take this field from you, you'll get your money back. Okay, so there's like all sorts of things over here. So let's reiterate. Reuven borrowed money from Levi, $1,000. When he borrowed that money, he said, well, I have this field that if I can't pay you back, you could take the field. Now, he then sold this field to Shimon. And he said to Shimon, if ever anybody knocks on your door and says that you need to give them the field because I owe them money, you can come back to me and I'll pay you back for the field. Okay, that's what's called achrayus. That Reuven sold the field to Shimon with achrayus, that if anything happens and somebody tries to take the field away from Shimon, he can come back to Reuven and get his money back. Now, Shimon never actually paid Reuven for the field, so he still owes Reuven the field. Reuven dies, and now the orphans come into the mix, and they start trying to collect different things. Everyone's trying to scramble to collect things, right? Levi, the creditor, is trying to collect, get back his $1,000 from Reuven or from his estate, whatever he can, maybe from Shimon, who's got the field. Reuven's orphans are trying to get the payment for the field that Shimon never paid their father. Kilu, there's a shtickle mess emerging over here. So here we go. So did Rava really say that a lender takes his collateral when the loan is defaulted only mikan lahaba from this point on? Rami bar Chama, but Rami bar Chama said Reuven. Okay, I wonder if it's sort of like a warning sign, if even like the Gemara is feeling the need to assign names to people. Reuven shmachosada l'Shimon ba'achrayis v'zak von olav b'milveh. So Reuven, okay, so he sells his field to Shimon. Okay, great. Ba'achrayis, and Reuven says, look, Shimon, if anybody ever knocks on your door and says that the field belongs to them because it was a guarantee for a loan, well then you come back to me, Shimon, and you say, hey Reuven, somebody just took away the field that I bought, give me my money back. The thing is that Shimon never actually paid Reuven for the field. He just said, look, I have other properties that are worth $1,000. I'm gonna, be mishabed those fields to the purchase of this field. Umes Reuven, and then Reuven dies. Vasabalchov de Reuven, and then Levi, the creditor, comes along. Vitarif le Shimon, and he goes to Shimon, right? So remember, Reuven owed Levi, the creditor, $1,000. Now, Shimon had bought a field from Reuven for $1,000. Reuven had told Shimon that, hey Shimon, if ever anybody takes away the field from you, you come back to me and you'll get your money back. And Shimon never actually paid Reuven for the field. So Shimon kind of owes Reuven or his orphans $1,000, and Reuven owed Levi, the creditor, $1,000. Levi, the creditor, goes directly to Shimon and says, hey Shimon, Reuven, when he was alive, never paid me my $1,000. I want to take away this field from you. So v'asa Shimon ufaise bezuze. So Shimon says to Levi, the creditor, he says, you know what? Rather than taking away this field, I want to hold on to this field. Reuven owed you $1,000? No problem. I owed Reuven $1,000. Levi, just take $1,000. Forget about the orphans. They owe you the money anyways. Let's just forget about them. I'll just deal with you directly and give you $1,000. Okay. So dinahu, so really, mekra din, essentially, the asupene Reuven, that the Reuven's orphans can come. V'amule the Shimon, and they could say to Shimon, who just paid off Levi the creditor, Onan metaltele shavak avun gabach. They could come to Shimon and say, hey Shimon, you owe us $1,000. And he'll say, what do you mean I owe you guys $1,000? You guys owe Levi $1,000 and I just paid Levi directly. Well, here's the thing. The movable objects of orphans, of an estate, well not an estate, but of orphans, are not mishubad to a Baal Chov. So meaning, if Levi would come to Reuven's children and say, hey guys, your father owed me $1,000, therefore I want you guys to pay me $1,000, they wouldn't have to pay him the $1,000. And therefore, what Reuven's children are saying to Shimon is, actually, we would not have had to pay Levi the creditor $1,000. So don't make the argument that, well, the $1,000 I was going to give to you, you would have had to pay Levi the creditor anyways. That's not true. We wouldn't have had to pay Levi the creditor. And therefore, you need to pay us the money that we are owed for the field. V'amar Rava, and said Rava, Ipikeach Shimon magbelu ara v'hadar gabe la minayu. So now says Rava, if Shimon was a smart guy, what he would say is, you know what, children of Reuven, rather than paying you $1,000 in cash, in money, I will just give you property, right? I'll just give you this field that I had purchased from your father. Here, rather than paying you, I'll just give you the field. And then he could take it back from them. Because remember, when Reuven sold the field to Shimon, he told Shimon, look, if ever anybody ever takes away this field from you because of money that was owed, well then I have to give you back either money or the field or whatever it is. So in this case, if Shimon paid the children in money, well then that's it. He paid them money and he paid them the money for the field and that's that. But if instead he gives them the field, well then it's ki'ilu, the clause will kick in, which is that if ever anybody comes to take away the field from you, so then you'll basically get it back. Damar of Nachman, because Rav Nachman says, Yisomim shegavu karka b'chovas aviyim b'achov chosav v'gova osamein. Right? So if you have a situation where you have, let's just forget about our initial characters of Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. I mean, they're all going to be playing the same roles essentially, but just different case. So if you had Reuven owed $1,000 to Levi the creditor, okay, and then they were also owed money from Shimon. So now Levi the creditor is unable to collect $1,000 from Reuven's children, right? Because we said that the money of the children is not mishubad to their father's loans. So they wouldn't have to pay Levi the creditor $1,000. However, if Reuven was owed money or property from somebody else, from Shimon, and Shimon paid back the Reuven's children with property rather than money, well then Levi the creditor would be able to take that property from Reuven's children. Okay, so therefore, even though money, Reuven's children's money is not mishubad to any loans that Reuven had, however, if they took property as payment for their father's loans that he lent, well, that could then have be given to, or be taken really from them by a creditor from Levi. So now in this case also, so if Shimon would pay the children back to our initial case, if Shimon would pay back the children with money, well then it's okay, well it's theirs and Shimon lost the money. But if he would pay them back with property, well then he could say, okay, well now, Reuven, your father had told me that if anything happens and the property is taken away from me, so then I'll get my money back. Well, now the property is being taken away from me, so I want to get paid back. And we know, so I'm a creditor now, and we know that a creditor can be paid back with land of the orphans. And therefore, I'm owed money for this land that was just now taken away from me. Therefore, I want to get paid back with that land that was taken away from me. Now, so now, going back to our lemafreya or mikanu lahaba, so I understand if Rava, who says that if Shimon is smart, he could take back, give them land rather than money and then take it back. Well, that makes sense if we say that when a lender accepts a collateral, so it's retroactive, which means that therefore when Reuven's children are taking back this field, it's ki'ilu, they already took back the field when when Reuven was still alive, and therefore that is why Shimon cannot take it back. That's why Shimon can now take it back from them, because it's as if they collected it when Reuven was still alive. But if you say that when you collect what's owed to you, it's only from this point and on, well then how come Shimon is allowed to then recollect this field from Reuven's children? Because then it'll just be as if the Reuven's children purchased some real estate. If Reuven's children then go and buy some property, is that going to be mishubad? Is that going to be dependent on or belonging to a creditor, right? Meaning Reuven's children, right? If Reuven owed some money, and now his children on their own buy some property with their own money, that doesn't become mishubad to any creditors of Reuven. And therefore, if we say that when Reuven's children take this field, so it is mikanu lahaba, that it's as if they took back the field right now, well then it should just be considered like real estate that they purchased, in which case Shimon would not be able to then go and take it back. But if we say that it's the mafreya, that when Shimon's children collect the field, it's retroactive, as if it was their father's already when their father was still alive, well in that case Shimon can say, oh, by the way, the deal I had with your father was that if it gets taken away from me, I get my money back, and therefore I want to now get paid back with this property. So the Gemara says, no, you can say still that mikan ulahaba hu gove, and therefore when Reuven's children are accepting this field from Shimon, it is from this point and on. Okay, well if that's the case, then how can Shimon collect it from them? Shiny Hasam, it's different in this case. To Amalahu, because Shimon is going to say to them, well, because just like I was responsible to pay your father $1,000, I was also responsible to pay Levi the creditor $1,000. Midi Reb Nosson, because of Reb Nosson, the Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa, I believe this is called the Shibuda de Reb Nosson. Reb Nosson Omer says, Reb Nosson, minayin the noshe b'chavero mana, b'chavero b'chavero, shmutziin mizeh, v'nosnin lazeh, tamulos lomar, v'nosan la'asher asham lo. How do we know? Minayin the noshe b'chavero mana, b'chavero b'chavero. So how do I know that if Shimon owes Reuven $100, and Reuven owes Levi $100, that Shimon can just pay Levi directly the $100, it doesn't have to go through Reuven. So Tamalom v'nasan l'asher asham lo, that you give it to the one who he owes, and the asham is the principal, whatever. So basically the money goes directly from Shimon to Levi, you don't need to go through Reuven. And therefore, the point being that these deals were kind of set in place already beforehand when Reuven was alive, right? And therefore, if the Reuven's children come and say to Shimon, like, hey, you need to give us this field because you never paid our father, well, he's going to say to them, hey, why are you coming to me and asking me to pay you for the field? Well, because of the deals and arrangements that your father had made while he was still alive. Well, part of the arrangements that your father had made while he was alive was that he also owed Levi $1,000. And therefore, if we're going based on the arrangements that your father did when he was alive, well, then we can just apply the Shibuda de Reb Nosson and say that just like I owed your father $1,000, well, your father owed Levi $1,000, and I just paid Levi directly. So if we're going to go based on sort of the pre-existing, setup, well, that setup says that I'm allowed to pay Levi directly, which is what I did. And that's why Shimon would be able to basically claim back his field based on these prior arrangements. Okay, that was a bit webby and complicated, but all right, well, that was that. So we tried to prove that according to Rava, it would be the mafreya who gove, but we could explain how it's really mikan l'haba, and this whole situation is just because of prior arrangements. Okay. Tanan, we learn in the Mishnah, Nachri shehilves Yisrael al chametzo achar Pesach mutar ba'ano. So we said in our Mishnah that if a non-Jew lends money to a Jew before Pesach, so then after Pesach, this chametz is mutar ba'ano. Now, so now the Gemara is not yet assuming that the chametz was brought over to the house of the non-Jew before Pesach. We are not yet assuming that. What we are assuming is that, the assumption right now is that simply the non-Jew lent some money to the Jew, and they made up that if the Jew defaults on the loan, well then a certain chametz will belong to the non-Jew. But that chametz is still in the house of the Jew. So we're saying that if the Jew defaults on the loan after Pesach, well then that chametz will just be considered chametz sha'aver all of a Pesach belonging to a nachri, which will be mutar ba'ano. So yomad b'shlama l'mafreya ugove. So this makes sense if you say that a lender collects retroactively. Okay, amtu la'achi mutar ba'ano. Well then I get the Mishnah. I understand why, since it's the non-Jew who's the lender, why it would be considered chametz sha'aver all of a Pesach of a nachri. Because it's considered that he collects it already retroactively from before Pesach, and therefore it's chametz sha'avar all of a Pesach belonging to a non-Jew, and that's why you can get hana from it. But if you say that the lender collects only from the point that he collects it on, i.e., he's collecting it after Pesach, well then amay mutar ba'ano b'shusa d'Yisrael avakoi. Then how come this chametz is going to be mutar ba'ano? After all, if it's considered that the lender is collecting it only after Pesach, well then that means it was in the possession of the Jew all Pesach, and it's chametz sha'avar all of a Pesach of a Jew, and it should be also ba'ano. So the Gemara answers, Hacha b'mayaskinon kisher hino etzlo. So here we're talking about where the Jew actually brought it over to the house of the non-Jew before Pesach, and also vice versa. Right, so therefore, in the case where the Jew brought it to the house of the non-Jew before Pesach, and the assumption is right now that Baal Chov Kone Mashkon, that a lender acquires the collateral that's brought to his house. So therefore, when when the Jew brings the chametz over to the house of the non-Jew before Pesach, we're assuming right now that it becomes the non-Jews, and therefore that is why it's considered chametz sha'avar of a Pesach of a non-Jew. And the same would apply in the opposite, which is that if the Jew is doing the lending and the non-Jew brings the chametz over to the house of the Jew before Shabbat, before Pesach, so then the chametz will be in the possession of the Jew, and therefore it would be also ba'ano. Says the Gemara, let's say that this idea of Baal Chov l'mafreya ugove u'merkanu l'haba ugove. Let's say it's machlokas tanoim. Okay. Yisrael shehilve l'nachri al chametzo lachar Pesach eno over. So here's a brisa similar to our Mishnah, but same sort of context but different opinions. So the brisa says, Yisrael shehilve l'nachri al chametzo. If a Jew lent money to a non-Jew, and the sort of the collateral for the loan was chametz. Okay. La'achar Pesach eino over. So after Pesach, it's fine. It's not asur ba'ano. Okay. Mishum Reb Meir amu over. From Reb Meir, they said that no, you would not be allowed to eat. You would not be allowed to get benefit from this chametz of the non-Jew who had borrowed money from a Jew. My love, so let's say, what's the machlokas between the Tanakam and Reb Meir? The Masavar l'mafreya ugove. That Reb Meir says, well, the Jew who lent the money is collecting retroactively, and therefore when the non-Jew defaults on the loan, so it's as if it was the Jews already from before Pesach, and that's why it's also ba'ano. Whereas the Tanakama holds that the Jew is collecting this chametz only from mikanu laba, from this point on, and therefore on Pesach it belonged to the non-Jew, and therefore it's mutar ba'ano. V'tizbra, but then the Gemara says that's not going to be a good suggestion, because Ema Seifa. Let's look at the very end of that exact brisa. What does it say? Avonachu shehilva liYisrael al chametzo la'achar Pesach tevrehakol over. Interesting. That if it was the non-Jew who was doing the lending, and it was the Jew's chametz, well then everyone agrees that you would be unable to get benefit from this chametz after Pesach. Now, the question is why? What would make sense is not just to say that if it was the non-Jew doing the lending, well then everyone agrees that the chametz would be mutar ba'ana. No, I'm sorry, that everyone agrees that it would be also ba'ana. Rather, so the end of the brisa says that if a non-Jew does the lending, everyone agrees that the chametz would be also ba'ana. But why does that make any sense? If we're saying it's about the mafreya versus mikana lahaba, well then we should say that if you say that it's limafreya, so it means that it belongs to the non-Jew before Pesach, in which case it should be mutar ba'ana. If you say it's mikana lahaba, then it means it belongs to the Jew during Pesach, in which case it would be also ba'ana. Why are we just saying flat out that if it was the non-Jew doing the lending, well then everyone agrees that you would not be allowed to get benefit after Pesach? So the Achav Mayaskinon, rather, this is what we're talking about. Kigon shehir hino etzlo. Okay, fine. So it's talking about where the Jew brought the chametz over to the house of the, well, it depends. There's the Reisha and the Seifa, but whether it's the Jew doing the lending or whether it's non-Jew doing the lending, we're talking about a situation where the borrower brought over his chametz to the lender before Pesach. Okay. Kigon shehir hino etzlo v'kamiflagei b'Rabbi Yitzchak. And the machlokas between the Tanakama and Reb Meir, in the case where it was the Jew doing the lending, is regarding Rabbi Yitzchak, the Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, that says Rabbi Yitzchak minayin leval chov shekone mashkon. How do you know that a lender acquires the collateral? Meaning that when a borrower shows up at the lender's house and he brings over a physical collateral and puts it in the house of the lender, that the lender acquires that collateral during the time of the loan. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, v'lechati tzedakah. Right? It says that if you have a lender, he needs to sort of give back the sleeping clothing every night to the borrower, or like the daytime clothing every day. And it says that this will be a righteous deed. Now, im eino kona mashkon tzedakah minayin. So if the lender did not actually acquire these articles of clothing, well then what's so great about it? He's just giving the person what's rightfully theirs. So rather, mikan lebal chov shekona mashkon. So rather, it must be that the lender actually acquires the collateral that's given to him, and out of the goodness of his heart, he gives back the night clothing to, every night, and the day clothing every day. Okay, so we see that a lender who collects a collateral acquires that collateral until the loan is paid back. So Tanakama Savar Animile Yisrael mi Yisrael hu dikarina be v'lchati tzedakah. Ava Yisrael minachri lo kani. And the Tanakama, who says that when a Jew lends money to a non-Jew, so then it will not be a violation of Chamish Avar Lava Pesach. So he holds that when we say that a lender acquires the collateral given to him by the borrower, that is only a Jew who's lending to another Jew. So when the borrower drops off the collateral at the house of the lender, so then it belongs to the lender. However, if the borrower was not Jewish, well then the collateral would not belong to the lender. And here, the lender was Jewish, the collateral was chametz, the borrower was not Jewish, and we're saying that the collateral does not belong to the Jew, i.e. so it continues to belong to the non-Jew, and therefore it's chametz that belong to a non-Jew over Pesach, and that's why it's mutar ba'ana. Reb Meir Savar, Reb Meir says, Kavachomer. He says, what do you mean? Yisrael mi Yisrael kani, Yisrael minachri lo kol sheken. If a Jew can be koneh the collateral from another Jew, certainly it can be koneh the collateral of a non-Jew. And therefore, when the non-Jew brings over his chametz before Pesach, it belongs to the Jew, and that's why Reb Meir says that you would be unable to eat this, to get this benefit or eat from this chametz after Pesach. But now the seifa of that brisa, which says that a non-Jew who lent money to a Jew, and now the Jew brings over his chametz collateral, right? Al chametzo achar Pesach tivriakol over But so after Pesach, in that case, everyone agrees that you'd be unable to get benefit from this chametz because certainly the non-Jewish lender was not kona this collateral from the Jewish borrower, and therefore it's considered in the Jew's possession all of Pesach, and if you eat it after Pesach, it would be also bahana. Okay, fine. Okay, so then how do we understand our Mishnah, which says that if a non-Jew lends to a Jew, well then after Pesach would be mutter bahana. So Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, a non-Jew who lent money to a Jew before Pesach, and the Jew gave some chametz, achar Pesach mutter bahana. So then after Pesach, you are allowed to get benefit from it. But now even if the Jew left the chametz in the house of the non-Jew, but I thought we said that a non-Jew would not acquire this collateral from the Jew. In which case, why are you allowed to get benefit from it after Pesach? After all, it was the Jews the entire Pesach. Lo kasha, it's no problem. Well, it depends what the Jew said to the non-Jew when he dropped off the chametz. If he says, look, if I default on the loan, it's yours from this very point, i.e. before Pesach, well then you'd be allowed to eat it after Pesach because it was already considered the non-Jews all of Pesach. But if he didn't deliberately stipulate that if I default on the loan, it'll be yours from now, from before Pesach, well then it will not be considered a kinyan, it will not be considered as if it belongs to the non-Jew from that point, and therefore it would be considered as if it was in the Jew's possession all of Pesach, and it would be asubano. Now how do you know that makes a difference? How do you know that it actually makes a difference if you say that if I don't pay back, then it'll be considered yours from now versus when he doesn't say that? Titania, as we learn in the Brisa Nachushihirin, Paspurni Eitzel Yisrael. If you have a non-Jew who, as a collateral for his loan, leaves some good big geschmacke bread by a yid as a collateral, over, well then he would not be over for Bal Yirah, and it wouldn't be a problem of eating it, I guess, after Pesach, Pesach, because it would still be considered the non-Jews. Over. But if the non-Jew says to the Jew when he drops off this big geschmacke bread that, if I don't pay it back, piraticha, higaticha, it's yours, so then over. So then already it will be considered like the Jews, and it will be considered chamisha avar of a Pesach of a Jew. Mashna reisha, mashna sefer. What's the difference when he says higaticha, it's yours versus not? What it must be saying is that when the non-Jew says, look, it's yours from now, from this point, well, that actually makes a difference, and then it's considered that it's the Jews from the point that the non-Jew brought it over, and therefore, at that point it would be considered chamish over of a Pesach of a Jew, and that will be a problem. Tana Abanan, the rabbis taught, Chanus Shel Yisrael. So this is already kind of a new topic. We're done with the lending stuff, which I guess is okay. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Chanus Shel Yisrael, Umaloi Shel Yisrael. So if you have a store that's owned by a Jew, and all of the products, all of the merchandise in the store belongs to the Jew, but there are workers who are not Jewish, and they work at the store. Well, then if after Pesach you find some chametz in the store, so the question is, do we have to assume that the chametz belonged to the Jew who owns the store and everything in it? In which case it's also ba'ana and certainly also ba'achila. Or can we say that maybe the chametz belongs to the non-Jews, to the workers, and therefore you would be allowed to eat it. It wouldn't be chametz sha'avar lava Pesach. So we say that we have to assume that it belongs to the Jew, and it's also ba'achila and ba'ana. However, if it was a store that was owned by a non-Jew, and all the merchandise belonged to a non-Jew, and there are Jewish workers who work at the store, well, in that case, any chametz that is found there after Pesach, you can assume that it belonged to the non-Jew, in which case it'll be chametz shavar of a Pesach of a non-Jew, and it'll be mutar b'achila and b'ana. New Mishnah, chametz shenafla olav mapoles, or hareu k'mivar. If you have chametz and a whole, building, let's say, fell down on it, well then, or not necessarily a building, but a bunch of stuff, it got buried under a bunch of stuff. So it's considered mivoar, it's considered like it's destroyed, and you don't have to worry about it. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer says, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, kol she'ein hakelev yachol lechapes acharov, as long as a dog would be unable to dig it out. Omer Rav Chizda says, Rav Chizda, mitzarech shivata b'libo, that nonetheless, even though this chametz is covered, all covered by some kind of a pile, you still need to nullify this chametz in your heart. Tana, it was not in a brayso. Kama chafisas hakelev, how deep does a dog dig? So shlosha tvachim, 3 tvachim. Rav Acha b'der Rav Yosef to Rav Ashi. Says Rav Acha b'der Rav Yosef to Rav Ashi, Hadam Shmuel, that which Shmuel says, Ksaf min loim shmira ela b'karka. So if you had some, let's say, hektish, and you reposed the hektish onto money, and you want to preserve that money so that nothing happens to it. So, says Shmuel, Ksaf min loim shmira ela b'karka, that money is specifically guarded in the ground, bury it. Miba'inin shlosha tvachim although, do you need to bury it 3 tvachim into deep in the ground or not? Omer lei. So Rav Ashi says to Rav Acha b'der Rav Yosef, Hacha mishum reicha ba'inin shlosha tvachim. When it comes to chametz on Pesach, which has a smell, which has a scent, so then you need to bury it 3 tvachim deep. Hasu mishum ichsuye me'enahu v'lo ba'ishlosha. Whereas by hektish money, it's just, the goal really is to just bury it, get it out of the sight of humans, in which case, you don't need 3 tvachim v'chama. So how many tvachim do you need? Rafim bar Papa misichra tefach. Says Rafim bar Papa from Sichra, it just needs to be 1 tefach deep in the ground, and that's enough to conceal it from people's eyes when it comes to money that you report the hektish onto. Well, Chaver, that was Daf Lamed Aleph of Masechta Bava Kama. Pesachim. There was some interesting stuff there. That was probably like our first Bava Kama deep dive yet in Shas, which is, I guess, kind of interesting. Anyway, so we discussed collecting a loan. Rava says that when you collect a loan, it's mikanu lahaba. It's from the point that you collect the loan, that is when not collecting a loan, collecting a collateral for a loan, that it becomes yours at the time that you collect it and moving forward. Whereas Abaye says it's actually retroactive, that it's considered that you already had collected it from the time that the money was given. And then we kind of had some, tried to prove it one way or another. Some were more complicated than others, but I don't think that we ended up really proving that per se. However, we then moved on to kind of explaining our Mishnah by saying, putting things in the context of taking ownership of a collateral. Right? At what point do you take ownership of a collateral? So it depends. We have the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak, who says that from the time that you give the collateral to somebody, he takes ownership, right? Balchov kone mashkon, that the lender takes possession of a collateral that is given to him. Now, this could depend. So if it's a Jew from another Jew, so then certainly the lender takes collateral. What about if the Jew is lending and a non-Jew gives him a collateral? So that's actually machlokas. The Tanna Kama said that no, it has to be a Jew from a Jew in order to take ownership of the collateral. Whereas, and therefore a non-Jew borrowing from a Jew, the Jew does not take ownership of the collateral when it is given. Whereas Rav Meir says, no, if a Jew takes ownership of a collateral from another Jew, certainly he can take ownership of a collateral from a non-Jew. Okay? Now, if the non-Jew is doing the lending and the Jew is giving the collateral, well, then everyone agrees that the non-Jew would not take possession of the collateral, take ownership of the collateral when it is given to him. However, there is a difference if the Jew specified when he gave the money to the non-Jew, the collateral to the non-Jew, that if I default on the loan, it will be yours from this very moment. Well, then the non-Jew would take possession of it from that time. Now then we got into a very brief discussion about if you go to a store after Pesach and you see some chametz there. So we said if the store is owned by a Jew and all the merchandise belongs to the Jew, even though there are non-Jewish workers over there, you have to assume that it's chametz she'avar of a Pesach of a Jew and it's not allowed. If the store is owned by a non-Jew and all the merchandise belongs to a non-Jew, but there are Jewish workers working there, you can assume that the chametz is of the non-Jews and it's chametz she'avar of a Pesach of a Nachri, in which case it would be permitted. That was daf 31 of Masechta Pesachim. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.